Hey everyone, welcome to the channel for another Escape from Tarkov video. In this one, I've got another video covering the top builds at different price points for weapons in Tarkov, this time with the SA-58, coming at you with a budget build, a mid-tier setup, and the top-of-the-line meta build. The SA-58 is easily in my top 3 picks for my favorite weapons in Tarkov, and it's also a very popular weapon among the community because it packs a deadly combination of high damage, a good fire rate, and mods that help counteract the high recoil of the 7.62x51 round. The stock build for the SA-58 does have some pretty nasty recoil, and it's quite a heavy rifle with relatively bad ergonomics no matter how you build it, so there is some drawbacks to it. It's also not really possible to effectively mod an SA-58 before you hit level 30 and get mechanic level 3, since all of the attachments that you need to add mods to the rifle are locked behind this trader level. However, once you do unlock some mods for the SA-58, it turns into a beast of a rifle that consistently takes down players in 2 shots, as long as you can deal with the recoil and make accurate hits. So with that intro out of the way, let's take a look at some builds, starting with my take on a budget SA-58 setup. As I mentioned in the intro, a big drawback to the SA-58 is that you can't really make any builds up until you hit level 30, because most of the attachments are locked behind mechanic level 3, and very few of them spawn in raid frequently enough for good supply on the flea market. That being said, this build is just aimed at adding some cost-effective recoil reduction attachments and some basic utility like a reflex sight and tactical device, while keeping the cost down around the 100k range for a full build. To start this one off, I'm just using a stock SA-58 with the 21-inch barrel off the flea market, which runs around 50 to 55,000 rubles. The first part that I add to this build is the universal M-lock handguard from mechanic level 3, which is pretty cheap and has a top rail for a red dot sight. For the sight, I like to use the DELTAPOINT reflex sight from Peacekeeper level 2, but this handguard can also mount other micro red dots like the PK06, RMR, and aimpoint sights. If you want to use other sights, you'll need the extreme duty dust cover from mechanic level 3, which is about 12,000 rubles and lets you mount full-size scopes. Next up, I add a set of M-lock rails to the handguard for attachments, and then I go for the Zenit RK04 grip from Skier level 3, a very cost-effective grip with a nice balance of stats. Other great choices here include the Magpul RVG and the RK1 grip. I also add a tactical device, and I'm just using the X400 flashlight across all these builds since it's my most used tactical device. The stock on this one is the SA-58 BRS stock, sold by mechanic level 3. This stock is a seriously underrated part for the SA-58, giving you 1% away from best in slot recoil and a nice ergonomics boost for a pretty fair price. Finally, the pistol grip on this is the SAW style SA-58 pistol grip, a very cheap ergonomics boost for the SA-58. When this build is all put together, it's got 108 recoil and 53 ergonomics for about 110,000 rubles total. It's not exactly low recoil, but it shaves a lot of points off of the base build. If you want to upgrade the muzzle device, Peacekeeper level 4 sells the LANTAC Dragon compensator for $100, which will give you a great bonus to recoil control without spending too much. Or you can search the market for the Fortis Red muzzle brake. For a budget suppressor, you can also try adding the Thunderbeast 30CB muzzle brake along with the Thunderbeast Ultra 5 suppressor, which keep the same recoil stats on this build but bump the price up to around 135,000 rubles. Next up, we'll go over a mid-tier build that starts to add some more expensive parts with a bigger focus on recoil control to make the SA-58 more consistent to fire on full auto and actually be able to hit your shots. The SA-58 currently doesn't have a lot of middle ground parts, but this build is about the best that you can make in terms of recoil before you hit level 40 and unlock some of the best in-slot parts at mechanic level 4. You will need Peacekeeper level 4 for this build since the muzzle device combo requires some parts from max level Peacekeeper. First off, the muzzle device requires 3 different pieces, starting with the LANTAC thread adapter and the LANTAC blast mitigation device. Once these are attached, you can add the LANTAC Dragon compensator and you've got the best in slot muzzle device for 7.62 rifles. The handguard on this build is the same as the budget option, the universal M-lock handguard, which takes M-lock rails to add attachments. For the grip on this one, I've upgraded to the RK14 grip from Skier level 3, which gets you some extra recoil control for the build, and of course I added an X400 flashlight and laser combo. To get a full-size sight onto the SA-58, you need the Extreme Duty Dust Cover from Mechanic level 3, which mounts pretty much any scope. I also highly recommend adding a LaRue Picatinny riser because it helps raise your sight picture up above the intense muzzle flash created by the blast mitigation device. For the sight itself, I'm going with an EOTech hollow sight, but you can swap this for whatever your preferred sight or scope is. Finally, I've added the same stock as the previous build, the SA-58 BRS stock for a nice recoil control boost, as well as the SAW style SA-58 pistol grip grip for some extra ergonomics. When it's all put together, this build gets you 81 recoil and about 49 ergonomics for a total price of around 170,000 rubles. It's a pretty significant upgrade in stats from the budget build, but it's also quite a bit more expensive. Personally, I think the full meta build is the best bang for your buck when you're running the SA-58, but let's take a look at the build first, and then you can make up your own mind about that. The last build I have for this video is a fully recoil-focused SA-58 setup that gets the recoil down into the 60s, which makes it much easier to shoot full auto and also helps with rapid tap shots from distance. This build doesn't have great ergonomics, but it's kind of the sacrifice that you need to make in order to pull the heavy recoil down to more manageable levels. This is honestly one of my favorite PvP builds, and it isn't really that much more expensive compared to the mid-tier setup, but does require multiple level 4 traders and level 40 to get set up. First up, this build uses the same muzzle device as the mid-tier build, starting with the LANTAC thread adapter and the blast mitigation device. Then you add the LANTAC dragon compensator and it's good to go. For the handguard, this one is upgraded to the CASV FAL handguard sold by Mechanic level 4. This one is the best in slot option for the SA-58 and takes special CASV rails to add attachments. For the grip, I'm going with the RK2 foregrip for maximum recoil control, but you can also get away with using the RK1 for some extra ergonomics if that's what you prefer. I've also added the X400 flashlight, so substitute this for whatever your preferred light or laser is. Next up, I've added the Extreme Duty dust cover to get a sight onto the build, as well as the Picatinny riser to get over the muzzle flash. For the sight, I'm sticking with an EOTech hollow sight as my preferred general purpose sight. The stock on this build is a pretty big change, starting with the SA-58 buffer tube adapter from Mechanic level 2. Next, you can get the Mesa Tactical hydraulic buffer tube at Peacekeeper level 4, which gives you negative ergonomics but some pretty impressive recoil stats. Finally, the stock itself is the HKE1 stock, which combines best in slot recoil with a small ergonomics boost. The last part on the build is the Fab AG FAL pistol grip sold by Skier level 4, which is the best in slot pistol grip for the SA-58. When this build is all put together, it has 63 recoil and around 43 ergonomics, which makes it actually fairly controllable even when you're dumping an entire mag in full auto. The build costs around 200,000 rubles total, so it's kind of expensive, but I think it's a great upgrade from the mid-tier build for only 30k extra. One alternative to this setup is to swap the muzzle device for a Daniel Defense Wave muzzle brake and the Wave suppressor, which brings the build up to 70 recoil but eliminates the huge muzzle flash and lets you run quiet for stealth raids. This also bumps the cost up to around 240,000 rubles, as it's the most expensive suppressor worth using right now. Another solid change that I can recommend for the build is to just use the BRS stock instead of the buffer tube setup. It's about half the price total, and you only lose out on 1% recoil control while gaining a lot of extra ergonomics. Well, that about covers it for these SA-58 builds. It's a rifle that definitely benefits from a lot of modding since the stock build has some pretty intense recoil, but once you get it set up right, it really does work. Hopefully this gives you a pretty good overview of some solid builds you can set up at different price points and some of the better parts you can combine for your own builds. I'm really hoping for some more parts for the SA-58 in the future, as I feel it's kind of lacking in early game mod options and some mid-tier handguards that could make for some interesting builds. It's definitely among my favorite weapons in the game, so I'm always hoping for some new mods. Thanks for checking out the video. I've got links to my Twitch stream, Discord server, and Patreon page down below for anyone interested. And until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City.